It's very high tech here at Bridges to Change.
That's all good. Yeah. You're like, where's the producer's booth? Okay.
I know. All right, here we go. Good morning, everybody. This is Monta Knudson. I'm the executive director over here at Bridges to Change. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you all for joining us again for coffee or water or juice with Monta, whatever you're drinking over there. Each week we bring on community partners and kind of highlight the work they're doing in the community. And this week I had the opportunity to invite an old friend back that I recently reconnected with at the gym. Cort, can you say your last names?
Sure thing. It's Dorn-Medeiros.
Dorn-Medeiros.
Dorn-Medeiros, yes.
And Cort, you are over at Lewis and Clark.
I am.
And
True.
what is your position over there?
I am an associate professor in the graduate school in professional mental health counseling with the addiction specialization. And I'm also the department chair of the counseling therapy and school psychology department. So both and.
Okay. All right.
A lot of words there, I know.
Cort and I have history together. We worked, what was it, 2008, 9?
That's
10?
what I was just trying to tell, Kit. I was like, I think it was maybe like 2009, 2010, couple of years there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were working in drug court and prison reentry, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly. I saw that isn't Christian still over at Lewis and Clark as well?
Yeah, Jeff Christensen, also worked for Volunteers of America. He and I overlapped there for a couple of years as well. Yeah, Jeff is also an associate professor in the mental health counseling program. So he and I work together, which is, small world, and very fortunate that we ended up together.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy to have you on. When I've been following you a little bit, so I knew you were at Lewis and Clark, and just being a provider, which both sides, and now you're an educator, bringing new folks into the field right now is challenging. We are seeing kind of workforce issues everywhere. So overall, I thought I would bring you on and talk a little bit about how you're preparing folks over there, specifically preparing folks to come work in more gender affirming areas. And I would like to hear a little bit about what's happening at the Lewis and Clark front on the educational side around preparing folks to come into the workplace, to the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. I'll start talking, and certainly interrupt me if you have follow-up questions or you need to, because I can go for a while. So I'll say, I've been at Lewis and Clark overall for about 10 years. So 2 of those years I was adjunct faculty. So I was still working for Volunteers of America, where you and I overlapped. And then I came on full-time in 2015 after I got my doctorate. So, I've been there full-time about 8 years now. And I think whenever I kind of talk about this topic, I know sometimes folks feel like, are we super behind, or like, should we be arrived at some promised land yet? I just like to emphasize that it's a process, and it's a process for everyone. So even, I'll say an institution like Lewis and Clark, where, at least at the graduate school, we have social justice in our mission statement. I think, we've been having these conversations around like, how can we be more inclusive and more supportive, especially around racial and gender diversity issues? Those have been ongoing conversations and an ongoing process. And things have changed a lot, even just in my, relatively short to medium kind of time there. So I think that's kind of important for also like treatment providers to kind of understand that, even though these things can take time, like changes can happen and do happen. So I think at Lewis and Clark, so a couple different things, anytime I think of sort of system-wide change, right? There's like multi-layers to this. And I think a lot of this would probably translate to, being a treatment provider as well. So like on the educational side, you think of everything from logistic things like, students maybe applying with a legal name, right, that they need to put on financial aid and things like that, but really going by a different name. or, something that seems kind of simple like that. And yet that was a very explicit conversation we had to have with our registrar's office of like, that sounds easy, but actually it was kind of complicated to have, folks' preferred names kind of show up on rosters and in the registration system and things like that. So I think, we've been through a process of sort of those kind of logistic type of things, pronouns, names that people use, and as well as, all the way to, admissions and thinking about, how do we ask certain questions during the admissions process, kind of in line with our, social justice mission in terms of, gender diversity and people's kind of understanding and openness, right? Not everybody comes in with like, I know all there is to know about, transgender, gender diverse individuals, but, people's openness to learning more about that, as well as perhaps lived experience. I will say at Lewis and Clark, we have, I think, a pretty significant number of students who do identify, whether as transgender or non-binary or, gender diverse in some way. So we've attracted, I think, a larger number of students who identify that way. We also have a significant, significant number of faculty who, first of all, just identify as LGBTQ plus kind of on that spectrum, but also on, openly transgender faculty. I'm one just in our small little program. And I also have a colleague who is openly transgender as well. He and I kind of like to joke that we have, 92% of the transgender faculty in counselor education at Lewis and Clark. And we say that somewhat in jest, but I think we do have a disproportionate, maybe in comparison, number of LGBTQ plus faculty. And of course, applicants and students, I think when they see that, they see sort of themselves reflected and like, oh, this might be a good place for me to be. And then I kind of, across our curriculum and our collaborations. So we also, as a part of our Center for Community Engagement, we have a somewhat newer collaborative relationship with the Transactive Gender Project. So they used to be their own separate kind of independent entity for several years. But about 2-ish years ago, we kind of took them on and they took us on as a partner. And so they're now housed in our Center for Community Engagement. So we not only have kind of curriculum aimed specifically at our students that's kind of integrated into, I'll say across all of our programs in the department, if I can kind of speak more to the department level, definitely in the counseling program, marriage and family, art therapy, and school psychology, but also at the community level. So the Center for Community Engagement that where Transactive is housed, their whole goal is to do community education. So, not only with our students, but also kind of towards the community at large, whether that's treatment providers or just people who are interested out in the community. Transactive Gender Project, Jen Burleton, who is the head there, she's incredible. And she does trainings all the time, all the time, whether through CCE or she also does sort of private trainings for companies or treatment providers. And her specialty is also working with transgender youth, which of course is like a really big thing right now. So, that's just a really strong point as well. So I could pause there, but I'll just emphasize the multiple kind of levels of sort of system-wide conversations and change that I think has had to happen to kind of foster more of that, like, welcoming type of environment for transgender students.
Yeah, it sounds like, at Lewis and Clark doing a ton of work, and that, it sounds like at the forefront of preparing students, supporting students, affirming students who are getting into this field. Is Lewis and Clark doing any like continuing education for folks who have been in the field for some time and might need to get some continuing education for supporting clients or individuals?
Yeah, so that's a great question and clarification. So our Center for Community Engagement. They used to be called Center for Continuing Education. So CCE, and folks can kind of look that up on the Lewis and Clark website. Should be pretty easy to find. I mean, they do a variety of trainings, of course, not just related to transgender topics, but they've offered quite a few, and many of those, as I mentioned, are run by Transactive, although not all of them. But those are trainings that usually they're pretty affordable, that current treatment providers, current counselors, people out in the field, peer mentors even, can all, usually those are all, open to anyone who wants to take them. Some of them are in person at Lewis and Clark, others are offered online, which is a little more accessible for some people. So I really encourage folks to check that out if they feel like, they want more of that educational piece, which I know I always learn something new whenever I do continuing education, whether it's a little something or a big something. So I really encourage folks to check those out and take advantage.
Yeah. My 24-year-old daughter came out trans when she was 17. So I got to experience what it was like, not only as a parent, but just as an individual, supporting her by using proper pronouns, her preferred name. And I really feel like and since you've worked in addictions outside of mental health, our addictions field is a little bit different, right?
Yes, it can be a little more gendered in that way. And yeah.
Especially like for an organization like Bridges to Change, we've come a long way from, that old school model from 2009, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? To working on being inclusive. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's right. That's like a part of the process that I also try to really encourage our students to, that, I think, because we have this social justice mission, we definitely, attract students who feel very passionately and are very dedicated to social justice, and I encourage them, like, if they're in an internship, right, and maybe everything isn't perfect, or maybe something could be changed, or maybe they see a problem somewhere, I always really encourage them to, like, have that conversation of, like, do you want to make change or do you want to be right? Because those can be two very different things. And, change can be a slow process, and I'm not saying it's not problematic, that it's not impactful or harmful, but if you want to be an agent of change, you can communicate with people, like, what you're seeing and what might be more beneficial in a way that's going to be more received than if you're, in somebody's face about it, or telling them all the problems about it, or not offering a solution, right? Just kind of pointing out problems without being like, here's maybe an idea of how we could do it better.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because what I'm hearing is like, how can folks be less critical or reactive over systems that are obviously not inclusive or oppressing folks, and how do we engage with that to help create change? If that system, that organization is indeed trying, like, the more critical we are, the less helpful we are in helping them make that change, right?
Yeah, and systems that are deeply entrenched for decades, and it can just take some time to kind of sort of dig out of that, right? Like, disembed from that, and and even small little changes can have an impact over time. I mean, I was just thinking about this morning, like, back in, I don't remember if you were there yet, or if it might have been before you came on, when I was working at VOA, but we still were with Bridges. And there was a male client, identified as male, cisgender male, but he really wanted a female mentor, male mentor. And there was, like, a lot of conversation, but eventually they said yes. And I was like, at the time, I was like, how cool that can happen. And, and he felt good about it, and the mentor was absolutely wonderful, and, like, they had a great relationship, and it was really impactful. And I think about little changes like that, of, like, making that decision to be like, sure, that's not what we usually do, and in fact, usually we at that time, like encourage the exact opposite, right? Like it's really important that, sort of men be with men and women be with women. And there's reasons behind that. But there was a flexibility to be able to accommodate that by just listening to the client, right? And his needs and his rationale for why that was important for him. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And, we make change based on little changes that we make along the way, right?
Exactly.
That's an example of that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We're even stuck, all of us organizations who are trying to do good, Bridges to Change is no exception of, like, we are working within this system that is not set up for the way that we want to move forward in
Right.
an inclusive environment, oppressed by systemic racism. So I'm working and growing this organization in a system that is not set up for that, right?
Right. Yes. Right.
From the funding system, like the government system, like it's really hard to make any substantial changes. It's taken 8 years just to get where we're at, and we have a long way to go. Even like changes, like when I came on board, was like, we can have medication assisted treatment in our housing, and it blew everybody's mind that,
oh my
gosh, people can be on medications and the world didn't fall apart in our housing. It was amazing.
Yeah. That was like unheard of 13 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, just like even, within sort of the drug court system, people to be able to, be on medication assisted treatment, which, now we know, I think I could speak at least sort of like research scientific wise, medication assisted treatment for like opioid addiction. I mean, it's, one of the most sort of, evidence-based kind of approaches to treatment for a lot of people. So, but at the time that was like, oh my goodness, such a struggle to get for people to even have that option.
Yeah. Kind of pivoting a little bit away from what we were talking about, moving into, where do you see higher education playing a pivotal role in changing our behavioral health landscape as you see it today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I see it as a very pivotal role, as you and I briefly discussed. There's, of course, a lot of workforce shortages, and I feel like I've been talking about that a lot recently. I was asked to kind of write this little blurb about it last week, and I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and it's interesting to me to think about, even just Lewis and Clark's not even talking about like other counseling programs in the area, which also graduate a good number of people. And even with not everybody sticking around in the Portland area, many do. And, between our counseling programs, the addictions program and, the general mental health program, we graduate about 60 students every year. And yet there's still this like general workforce shortage. Even private practitioners. I mean, I know folks who've been desperate trying to find some kind of treatment, and, and addictions, of course, is even smaller than general mental health, especially if you want to see a private practitioner. It's like practically unheard of, right? Somebody that is specializing in addiction in private practice. They just can't find anybody. There's huge wait lists and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I do think in that sense, we need to continue to graduate people, as well as other programs in the area, and kind of sticking to constantly listening to our students, constantly developing our curriculum, as well as just like advocating out in the community, along with a colleague, Dr. Alexia De Leon, and I. She helps run the addictions program. We submitted a grant last year and thankfully received, $500,000 just for scholarships, which is unbelievable. I mean, Lewis and Clark is a very expensive school. And so the more we can do, I'm very focused on like finding funding because I do realize it is expensive. It's a big responsibility and a big commitment to take on a lot of student loans. I mean, I know that from personal experience. And so I see it as kind of a both and, like, yes, I want to develop a workforce and I wanted to help develop a sustainable workforce that isn't, burdened by, $200,000 in student loans, who feels like they can't work for an agency because they're not going to get paid as much, even if that's what they want to do. I will say we have seen more students, I think, go into private practice than go to agencies, which from my experience is like really sad, because I think of like how valuable I think of my own kind of agency experience, but I also get it. I mean, when you need to make money and you need to be sustainable and you need, like, I understand why, private practice is an attractive option. So yeah, I think we have a huge responsibility in terms of developing the workforce.
Yeah, those are all really valid points. And to your point of, getting folks to come work for agencies, you can't expect folks that their undergrad is, 50 to 100 grand.
Right.
Then Clark, there's another 100 plus K to come out as an unlicensed LPC, just a QMHP, to make $24 an hour at a nonprofit just doesn't work, right? So what we're working on kind of at the policy legislative level is to continue to push and get Medicaid on parity with private markets, right? So if you're going to go to Kaiser as a QMHP and make $32 an hour or $36 an hour, why can't we do that in the Medicaid market? Well, we can't, because reimbursement rates aren't on parity with private pay or, private insurance. So we have to continue to push that. And until we change that, the agencies continue to be underfunded, understaffed.
Yeah.
Dealing with most impacted communities in most cases, right? So so it is a challenge, but we've made some changes. We got a 30% increase in Medicaid reimbursement rates last year. And our governor, Tina Kotek, has signaled that she's going to continue to make investments into behavioral health. We just need our federal government to signal they're going to do that, right? So all that's very true. And I feel like, when I was, I think after you finished out your time at VOA, I ended up at the new ENACT, and then I became a clinical supervisor for addictions. But having, and we had a ton of Lewis and Clark QMHPs coming through working on their internships. And they miss a ton of great learning working with folks that we serve. It's a great ground to really learn and to hone your skills as a clinician with very challenging clients, individuals. And so they are missing out on that experience.
100%. And I do feel like I'm still a champion for agencies when I'm like, and obviously in the internship experience, many of them, of course, go to agencies. That's kind of a common thing, or bigger organizations like Hazelden and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I have so much positive to say about the value of working for an agency. I mean, obviously VOA was kind of, my experience, and I worked in multiple programs, and just the ability to work with such a diverse clientele. And, yes, I mean that, racial, ethnic diversity, but also socioeconomic diversity. I mean, drug court, talk about like just a plethora of people from different walks of life. And when I kind of explained to my students, like, I had clients who were, houseless or kind of struggling with that level of stability. And I had somebody who'd been a registered nurse. I had somebody who had a PhD. I had, it was just that like real example of, addiction itself doesn't discriminate, right? Like all sorts of different people struggle with addiction, and just having that like lived experience. And, because some of our students aren't necessarily connected personally to that experience. And so, you can hold a lot of those kind of stereotypes about, what does an addict, quote unquote, kind of look like. And just having that experience of like, oh, this is something that touches all sorts of different people. And like, how can I then learn to connect with and help all sorts of different people kind of through this process?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, more work to be done for sure.
Absolutely. And I appreciate, all the changes Bridges has done. And, you know, I'll say, I know a lot of changes happened in a lot of different agencies and over the last few years. So, I mean, I definitely applaud your work there, because I think that is really, really impactful for, you know, all sorts of people, our students included.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks for taking the time this morning for having this
absolutely
chat with us at Bridges the Change. And
happy to be here. Happy to reconnect.
I think we reach about 14 million followers every morning. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Probably only about 11 million are tuning in right now, but okay.
But anyway, I'm going to let you get on with your rest of your week and your morning, and I appreciate you and thank you for all the work that you're doing, preparing folks to come out and help the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Monta. Appreciate it.
Take care. All right. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.